but I appreciate your question nonetheless. Madame Vandenbeld, please.
Yes, thank you very, very much. And just following on the question I asked the minister, we saw that when the amalgamation happened between CETA and what's now Global Affairs, it seems that some of the programs got lost. So, for instance, the MEOP program, the one on electoral observation, had been funded over, I think, between 2008 and 2013. It was funded about $20 million specifically for that program. And then it moved over in 2013. And so under the previous government, under Minister Baird, it lost all its funding. Still sat somewhere, but are there other examples of programs that when things were amalgamated that didn't really fit in one area or another and perhaps ended up orphaned the same way that electoral observation did?
I'm trying to think of that, to think of any examples, and none of them really come to mind. So at the time of amalgamation, what happened essentially was two departments were essentially just stitched together. And there were certain programs that fell, for example, election observations might have fallen in the peace and security area, but the development programs that were very, very clearly development stayed intact. And what was done in terms of how we managed our finances is we created a special fund for anything that was tagged against development. So we can monitor and track development expenditures to ensure they continue to be used for international development purposes that were continue to be counted as official development assistance. Okay. So there were internal financial structures to make sure not only the grants and contributions, but the FTEs, so that the same amount of operating expenditures were maintained for that purpose.
And speaking of the grants and contributions and the FTEs, one of the things that I'm hearing from civil society is that over the years, and this is not recent, this is over the last, say, decade, more and more it's not contribution agreements, but it's moving more toward contracts and short-term one-off. The length of time for project proposals to be approved is increasing, which, of course, these are the sorts of things that are very difficult for Canadian organizations. Often their staff are funded through the different projects. Very few of them have core funding. And having long-term, I'll go back to democratic development, very often you don't know what's going to happen in a country. So you might plan for electoral assistance, but the election is delayed. Or you might plan for a long-term parliamentary program, and then the parliament is dissolved, something happens. So really, and then in certain areas, you need to go in quickly. So, Venezuela right now would be an example where, there's a tremendous need very quickly. Sometimes it's less predictable even than that one. And so there have been suggestions made of having more long-term agreements, say 10-year agreements, which would be very flexible, which would allow rapid response within certain parameters, but allowing these Canadian organizations, which is another issue, is that I think that a lot of our support should be going to organizations that are based in Canada and local partners. But is there a way that we could move more toward providing the kind of long-term sustained support, particularly so organizations don't have staff and then they have a gap of 3 or 4 months and then they have to lay off the staff, bring the staff back because now they have another project? Is there a way to provide that kind of longevity, both because it's good for NGOs, but also because it's good for development assistance, where those partnerships, the local partnerships on the ground, especially in politics and democracy, the political partnerships that are made are so vitally important, and they're very easily lost if you withdraw from that country and then try to come back again. Is there a move toward that?
Yeah, so that was feedback that the department received very clearly through the Feminist International Assistance Policy consultations. It was very clear that our processes can be complex and cumbersome on partners. And what we also want to do is make sure that, yes, our processes are streamlined, but we've done adequate due diligence at the same time. And so what we've been looking at over the last few months is to see if there are ways of balancing both of those objectives by lightening and streamlining the information that we request at once. Looking at the length of contribution agreements and how we amend them. We do know that in the types of contexts that we work in, things shift, costs shift. And so if we can do that in a more nimble fashion, but again, assure that when there is a dollar allocated, it does go to the intended recipient, and that we have those due diligence measures in place, that we are looking at those things very clearly. We've had consultations with NGOs and the Canadian NGO community to do that. And over the summer, we will start rolling out some of those changes.
And with regard to RBM, the results-based management framework, I mean, obviously this is a very, very important accountability mechanism all across government. But when you're talking about development, it isn't necessarily always the most suitable accountability tool, because often, rather than showing that X amount of funding led to X result, you're not trying to achieve a result, you're trying to prevent things from getting more worse. So it may be that you've got, the situation is here, it's about to go down here, and you make sure that it's gone here, as opposed to increasing and having a result to show for it. How do you prove a negative? How do you prove that without us, 40,000 more people would have starved, but now only 5,000 starved? I mean, to put it very, very bluntly, it's very hard in an RBM framework when you're working on the ground in a country on development, particularly, to necessarily be able to have all of those indicators and outcomes nicely aligned ahead of time and then within the timeframes. Is there a way to find an accountability mechanism? I agree, absolutely, we need to be accountable for the money, but something that in the field of development might be a little bit more flexible?
So we were talking earlier about some of the performance indicators, and underpin that is an enormous results framework, and we do have experts in results-based management at the project level, and they all roll up into the indicators that we publish in the departmental results report. So those indicators are consulted with the project officers, with the NGO, and so whether it is something that doesn't get worse or whether it's an aspirational type of goal, those all get built in. But again, I think we were looking very clearly at how do we make those, how do we track those results and make them meaningful in terms of our reporting, and to ensure that we deliver value through our development dollars.
Now, in terms of our